In Buddhism, the concept of ego, often referred to as self or Atman, is central to understanding the nature of suffering and the path to enlightenment. Unlike Western interpretations of the ego, which generally see it as an integral part of individual identity and self-worth, Buddhism views the ego as a construct that leads to attachment, desire, and ultimately, suffering. The teachings of the Buddha emphasize the idea of anatta, or no self, suggesting that the belief in a permanent, unchanging self is an illusion. This misconception is considered one of the primary obstacles to achieving true insight and liberation. By recognizing the transient and interconnected nature of all things, practitioners can diminish the ego's influence, leading to a state of equanimity and freedom from the cycles of rebirth and suffering. This fundamental shift in perception is essential for anyone seeking to understand and practice the core principles of Buddhist philosophy. The illusion of self. The concept of ego, or self, is deeply embedded in human consciousness and culture. From an early age, individuals are conditioned to believe in the existence of a distinct, autonomous self that is separate from others and the world. This belief in a permanent, unchanging self is referred to as Atman in many philosophical traditions. However, Buddhism offers a radically different perspective, positing that the self is an illusion, a construct born out of ignorance and attachment. Central to Buddhist philosophy is the doctrine of anatta, or no self. This teaching asserts that what we perceive as the self is merely a collection of transient physical and mental phenomena, without any underlying essence. According to the Buddha, clinging to the notion of a permanent self is the root cause of suffering, dukkha. This insight into the nature of self was one of the Buddha's most profound revelations and forms the foundation of his teachings. Historically, the Buddha's teachings on anatta were revolutionary. During his time, many Indian spiritual traditions, such as Hinduism, upheld the belief in an eternal soul, Atman, that transmigrates from one life to the next. The Buddha challenged this view by arguing that all phenomena, including what we call the self, are impermanent and interdependent. He illustrated this with the concept of the 5 aggregates, skandhas: form, rupa, feeling, vedana; perception, sana; mental formations, sankhara; and consciousness, vijnana. These aggregates come together to create the illusion of a self, but none of them, individually or collectively, constitute a permanent entity. The Buddha's teachings on anatta are not merely theoretical, but have practical implications for how we live our lives. By understanding and internalizing the principle of no self, we can begin to loosen the grip of attachment and desire that causes so much suffering. This process involves mindfulness and meditation practices that help us observe the arising and passing away of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Through such practices, we can see for ourselves the transient and interconnected nature of our experiences, gradually diminishing our identification with the ego. In contrast to the Buddhist view, Western notions of ego often emphasize the importance of a strong, well-defined self. Western psychology, for example, frequently regards the ego as a crucial aspect of mental health and personal development. The ego is seen as the center of a person's identity, responsible for mediating between internal desires and external reality. While a healthy ego is thought to contribute to a sense of autonomy and self-worth, an overinflated ego can lead to narcissism and interpersonal conflicts. Despite these differences, there are points of convergence between Buddhist and Western perspectives on the self. For instance, some modern psychologists and philosophers recognize that the sense of a separate self can be a source of distress and advocate for practices that promote self-transcendence and interconnectedness. Mindfulness-based therapies, which draw heavily from Buddhist practices, are increasingly popular in the West and aim to reduce suffering by fostering a more flexible and expansive sense of self. In Buddhism, the realization of anatta is not an intellectual exercise, but a transformative experience that alters one's relationship with the world. This realization is part of the broader goal of attaining enlightenment, or nirvana, a state of liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara. Enlightenment involves seeing things as they truly are, free from the distortions of ego and ignorance. It is characterized by profound peace, compassion, and wisdom. To achieve this realization, Buddhist practitioners engage in various disciplines, including ethical conduct, sila, meditation, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. Ethical conduct involves living in a way that reduces harm and promotes harmony, which helps to purify the mind. Meditation practices, such as mindfulness and concentration, train the mind to see through the illusions of self and other. Finally, the cultivation of wisdom involves understanding the true nature of reality, including the principles of impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and no self, anatta. One of the key challenges in understanding anatta is overcoming deeply ingrained habits of thought and perception. The belief in a permanent self is reinforced by language, social conventions, and personal experiences. For example, we use pronouns like I and me as if they refer to an unchanging entity, and we often speak of my body or my mind as if they are possessions of a distinct self. However, through careful examination and contemplation, we can begin to see these constructs for what they are, useful fictions rather than ultimate truths. The Buddhist concept of anatta invites us to rethink our assumptions about the self, and to explore a more fluid and interconnected understanding of existence. By letting go of the illusion of a separate, permanent self, we open ourselves to a more compassionate and liberated way of being. This journey requires dedication and practice, but the rewards are profound, offering a path to true peace and freedom from suffering. The role of ego in suffering. In Buddhism, the ego, or the sense of a separate self, is intricately linked to the experience of suffering, known as dukkha. The Buddha's teachings highlight that suffering arises from attachment and desire, both of which are rooted in the illusion of an independent, enduring self. To fully understand the role of the ego in suffering, it is essential to explore how attachment to the self perpetuates a cycle of craving, dissatisfaction, and pain. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy are the Four Noble Truths, which provide a framework for understanding suffering and its cessation. The first truth, the truth of suffering, dukkha, acknowledges that suffering is an inherent part of human existence. Life inevitably involves pain, loss, and impermanence. The second truth, the truth of the cause of suffering, samudaya, identifies craving, tanha, and attachment, upadana, as the primary causes of suffering. These cravings and attachments are deeply connected to the ego, as they arise from a desire to maintain and protect the self. The ego's attachment manifests in various forms, such as the desire for sensory pleasures, the yearning for existence and status, and the fear of non-existence or annihilation. These desires lead to a constant state of seeking and striving, which ultimately results in suffering. For instance, when we crave material possessions, relationships, or recognition, we become attached to these external factors for our sense of identity and happiness. However, because all things are impermanent, these attachments inevitably lead to disappointment and pain when they change or disappear. The third noble truth, the truth of the end of suffering, nirodha, offers hope by asserting that it is possible to overcome suffering by relinquishing attachment and desire. This cessation of suffering is achieved through the realization of anatta, or no self, and the dissolution of the ego. When we understand that the self is an illusion, we can begin to let go of the attachments that cause suffering. The fourth noble truth, the truth of the path. Leading to the end of suffering, Magga, outlines the Eightfold Path, which provides practical guidance for cultivating ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom to overcome the ego and its attachments. The relationship between ego and suffering is further illustrated through various parables and teachings in Buddhist scripture. One well-known story is that of Kisa Gotami, a woman who was devastated by the death of her only child. Overwhelmed by grief, she sought the Buddha's help. He instructed her to find a mustard seed from a household that had not been touched by death. After visiting many homes, Kisa Gotami realized that death and suffering were universal experiences. This insight helped her let go of her personal attachment and find peace. The story underscores how attachment to the self and its desires intensifies suffering, and how understanding the impermanence of life can lead to liberation. Another illustrative teaching is the analogy of the two arrows. The Buddha explained that when we experience a painful event, it is like being struck by an arrow. The initial pain is unavoidable. However, when we react with resistance, attachment, or aversion, it is as if we are struck by a second arrow, which we have inflicted upon ourselves. This second arrow represents the additional suffering created by the ego's reactions and attachments. By recognizing and letting go of these reactions, we can avoid the second arrow and reduce our suffering. Buddhist practice provides numerous tools for addressing the ego and its role in suffering. Mindfulness meditation, for example, cultivates awareness of the present moment and helps practitioners observe their thoughts and emotions without attachment. Through mindfulness, individuals can see how their ego-driven desires and fears contribute to their suffering and can begin to disentangle themselves from these patterns. Loving kindness, metta. Meditation is another powerful practice that fosters compassion and reduces the ego's tendency to prioritize the self over others. By cultivating unconditional love and kindness for all beings, practitioners weaken the ego's grip and enhance their sense of interconnectedness. The practice of ethical conduct, sila, also plays a crucial role in reducing the ego's influence. The Buddha outlined 5 precepts for lay practitioners, which include refraining from harming living beings, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. By adhering to these precepts, individuals create a foundation of moral integrity that supports the cultivation of mindfulness and wisdom. Ethical conduct helps to purify the mind and reduce selfish, ego-driven behaviors that lead to suffering. The concept of dependent origination, paticca samuppada, further elucidates the interconnectedness of all phenomena and the role of the ego in suffering. According to this principle, everything arises and ceases due to specific conditions. There is no independent, permanent self. Instead, our sense of self is the result of a complex interplay of physical and mental processes. By understanding dependent origination, we can see how the illusion of the self leads to craving and attachment, and how these, in turn, result in suffering. This insight helps to dismantle the ego and its hold on our perceptions and actions. The ego plays a central role in the experience of suffering in Buddhist thought. By clinging to the illusion of a separate, enduring self, we generate cravings and attachments that lead to dissatisfaction and pain. The Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the practices of mindfulness, loving kindness, and ethical conduct provide a comprehensive approach to understanding and overcoming the ego's influence. Through these practices, we can gradually loosen the grip of the ego, diminish our attachments, and move toward a state of liberation and peace. The journey requires dedication and effort, but the profound transformation it offers is well worth the endeavor. Ego and interconnectedness. The Buddhist perspective on ego and self is intricately tied to the concept of interconnectedness, or dependent origination, paticca samuppada. This principle holds that all phenomena arise and cease based on specific conditions and are interdependent. There is no independent, autonomous self. Instead, our sense of self is a result of a web of relationships and conditions that are constantly changing. Understanding this interconnectedness is crucial for dismantling the illusion of the ego and reducing suffering. Dependent origination is one of the core teachings of the Buddha and is depicted in the 12 links of dependent origination. These links illustrate how ignorance, avijja, leads to the formation of mental formations, sankhara, which in turn condition consciousness, vijnana, and so on, ultimately resulting in birth, aging, death, and suffering. Each link is dependent on the previous one, showing how all phenomena are interconnected and arise from a complex network of causes and conditions. By understanding this chain, practitioners can see how the illusion of a separate self is constructed and maintained. The concept of interconnectedness is further exemplified in the metaphor of Indra's net, a traditional Buddhist image used to illustrate the interpenetration and interdependence of all things. Indra's net is described as a vast net stretching infinitely in all directions, with a jewel at each intersection. Each jewel reflects all the other jewels, symbolizing how each individual phenomenon contains and reflects the entire universe. This metaphor emphasizes that nothing exists in isolation, and that the self is an illusion created by our limited perception. Recognizing interconnectedness has profound implications for how we perceive ourselves and our relationships with others. It challenges the ego's tendency to see itself as separate and superior, and fosters a sense of humility and compassion. When we understand that our well-being is intimately connected with the well-being of others, we become more inclined to act with kindness and consideration. This shift in perspective can lead to more harmonious relationships and a more compassionate society. One of the practical ways to cultivate an awareness of interconnectedness is through mindfulness practice. Mindfulness involves paying close attention to the present moment and observing our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment. Through mindfulness, we can begin to see how our experiences are influenced by a multitude of factors, including our environment, past experiences, and the people around us. This awareness helps to break down the illusion of a separate self and highlights our interconnected nature. Another important practice is the cultivation of loving kindness, metta, and compassion, karuna. These practices involve generating feelings of goodwill and empathy toward all beings, including oneself. By regularly engaging in loving kindness meditation, practitioners can weaken the ego's tendency to prioritize the self over others and develop a more inclusive and interconnected sense of identity. This shift not only reduces personal suffering, but also contributes to a more compassionate and interconnected world. The teachings of the Buddha also emphasize the importance of ethical conduct in recognizing and honoring our interconnectedness. The 5 precepts, which include refraining from harming living beings, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication, provide a moral framework for living in a way that respects the interconnected nature of existence. By adhering to these precepts, individuals can create positive conditions for themselves and others, reducing suffering and fostering harmony. The concept of interconnectedness is not only a philosophical idea, but also has practical applications in addressing contemporary global issues. Environmental degradation, social inequality, and conflicts are often the result of the ego's desire for control, dominance, and consumption without regard for the broader impact. By recognizing our interconnectedness, we can adopt more sustainable and equitable practices that consider the well-being of all beings and the planet. This shift in consciousness is essential for addressing the complex and interconnected challenges of the modern world. Scientific research also supports the Buddhist view of interconnectedness. Studies in fields such as ecology, quantum physics, and systems theory reveal the intricate interconnections that exist within natural systems and the broader universe. These scientific insights align with the Buddhist understanding that nothing exists in isolation, and that all phenomena are part of a dynamic web of relationships. This convergence between science and Buddhism can deepen our appreciation of interconnectedness and inspire more holistic and compassionate approaches to life. In addition to mindfulness and ethical conduct, the practice of meditation can further enhance our understanding of interconnectedness. Meditation helps to quiet the mind and allows us to experience the underlying unity of all things. In deep states of meditation, practitioners may experience a sense of oneness with the universe, where the boundaries between self and other dissolve. These experiences can provide direct insight into the interconnected nature of existence and reduce the ego's grip. Buddhist teachings also emphasize the importance of wisdom, panna, in understanding interconnectedness. Wisdom involves seeing things as they truly are, free from the distortions of ego and ignorance. It requires a deep understanding of impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and no self, anatta. By cultivating wisdom, practitioners can see through the illusion of a separate self and recognize the interdependent nature of all phenomena. This insight is crucial for achieving liberation from suffering and attaining enlightenment, nirvana. The recognition of interconnectedness also has profound implications for our sense of identity and purpose. When we see ourselves as interconnected with all beings, our sense of self expands beyond the narrow confines of the ego. We begin to identify with the broader web of life and feel a deep sense of responsibility and care for the world around us. This expanded sense of identity can lead to a more meaningful and fulfilling life, grounded in compassion and service to others. The concept of interconnectedness is central to the Buddhist understanding of the ego and self. By recognizing that all phenomena are interdependent and that the self is an illusion, we can begin to dismantle the ego and reduce suffering. Mindfulness, ethical conduct, loving kindness, and wisdom are essential practices for cultivating an awareness of interconnectedness and fostering a more compassionate and harmonious world. The insights gained from these practices can transform our relationships, our communities, and our approach to global challenges, leading to a more sustainable and equitable future. Practices for diminishing the ego. Diminishing the ego is a fundamental objective in Buddhist practice, as it is essential for reducing suffering and achieving enlightenment. The ego, or the sense of a separate self, leads to attachment, desire, and aversion, which in turn cause suffering. To weaken the ego's grip, Buddhism offers a variety of practices that cultivate awareness, mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. These practices help individuals see through the illusion of the self and develop a more interconnected and compassionate way of being. One of the primary practices for diminishing the ego is mindfulness meditation, vipassana. Mindfulness involves paying close attention to the present moment with a non-judgmental awareness. Through regular mindfulness meditation, practitioners learn to observe their thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations without becoming attached to them. This practice helps to reveal the transient and impersonal nature of experiences, undermining the ego's tendency to cling to a fixed identity. By observing the arising and passing away of phenomena, practitioners can see that the self is not a permanent entity, but a constantly changing process. Another important practice is loving kindness meditation, metta. This practice involves generating feelings of goodwill and compassion toward oneself and others. Practitioners begin by directing loving kindness toward themselves, then gradually extend it to loved ones, acquaintances, strangers, and even those they find difficult. This practice helps to break down the barriers of the ego, fostering a sense of interconnectedness and reducing self-centeredness. Loving kindness meditation can transform negative emotions and promote a more compassionate and altruistic outlook. Compassion meditation, karuna, is closely related to loving kindness meditation and focuses specifically on cultivating empathy and compassion for the suffering of others. Practitioners reflect on the universal nature of suffering and generate a heartfelt wish for the relief of all beings. This practice helps to soften the ego's rigid boundaries and develop a deep sense of solidarity with others. By recognizing that all beings experience suffering, practitioners can diminish their own ego-driven desires and aversions. Ethical conduct, sila, is another crucial aspect of diminishing the ego. The Buddha outlined 5 precepts for lay practitioners: refraining from harming living beings, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. Adhering to these precepts helps to create a foundation of moral integrity and reduces behaviors driven by egoistic desires. Ethical conduct purifies the mind and fosters a sense of responsibility and interconnectedness. It also creates positive karma, which supports spiritual growth and diminishes the ego's influence. The practice of generosity, dana, is a powerful antidote to the ego. Generosity involves giving freely of one's time, resources, and energy to benefit others without expecting anything in return. Acts of generosity weaken the ego's attachment to possessions and the idea of mine and yours. They cultivate a sense of abundance and interconnectedness, counteracting the ego's tendencies toward greed and selfishness. Generosity also strengthens the bonds of community and creates a sense of shared well-being. Another practice that helps to diminish the ego is the contemplation of impermanence, anicca. By reflecting on the transient nature of all things, practitioners can see that nothing, including the self, is fixed or permanent. This insight helps to loosen the ego's grip and reduce attachment to fleeting experiences and identities. Contemplating impermanence fosters a sense of equanimity and acceptance, allowing practitioners to navigate the ups and downs of life with greater ease. The practice of insight meditation, vipassana, goes hand in hand with mindfulness and involves a deeper investigation into the nature of reality. Through insight meditation, practitioners develop a clear understanding of the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and no self, anatta. By directly experiencing these truths, practitioners can dismantle the illusion of the ego and cultivate a more liberated and compassionate way of being. Yoga and physical practices can also play a role in diminishing the ego. These practices help to integrate body and mind, fostering a sense of unity and presence. They encourage practitioners to let go of rigid self-concepts and embrace a more fluid and dynamic sense of self. Physical practices also help to release tension and stress, which are often manifestations of the ego's struggles and attachments. The study of Buddhist teachings, dharma, and scriptures can provide valuable insights and guidance for diminishing the ego. By studying the Buddha's teachings, practitioners can gain a deeper understanding of the nature of the self and the causes of suffering. Engaging with Dharma teachings helps to reinforce the principles of impermanence, no self, and interconnectedness. It also provides inspiration and support for the ongoing practice of diminishing the ego. Participating in retreats and intensive practice periods can be particularly effective for diminishing the ego. Retreats provide a structured environment for deep meditation and reflection, away from the distractions of daily life. Intensive practice allows practitioners to go deeper into their meditation and gain profound insights into the nature of the self. Retreats also offer the support of a community of practitioners, fostering a sense of shared purpose and interconnectedness. The role of a teacher or spiritual guide, kalyanamitta, is also important in the practice of diminishing the ego. A skilled teacher can provide personalized guidance, support, and feedback, helping practitioners to navigate the challenges of the path. A teacher can also model the qualities of compassion, wisdom, and humility, providing a living example of the benefits of diminishing the ego. Developing a relationship with a teacher can create a sense of accountability and inspiration, encouraging practitioners to stay committed to their practice. In addition to these formal practices, everyday mindfulness and awareness are crucial for diminishing the ego. By bringing mindfulness into daily activities such as eating, walking, working, and interacting with others, practitioners can cultivate a continuous awareness of the present moment. This ongoing mindfulness helps to weaken the ego's habitual patterns and fosters a more connected and compassionate way of living. Diminishing the ego is a multifaceted process that involves a variety of practices, including mindfulness meditation, loving kindness and compassion meditation, ethical conduct, generosity, contemplation of impermanence, insight meditation, physical practices, study of the Dharma, participation in retreats, guidance from a teacher, and everyday mindfulness. These practices work together to weaken the ego's grip, reduce suffering, and cultivate a more interconnected and compassionate way of being. By dedicating themselves to these practices, individuals can gradually dismantle the illusion of the self and move toward greater freedom, peace, and enlightenment. Achieving liberation from the ego. Achieving liberation from the ego is a central aim in Buddhist practice, as it leads to the cessation of suffering and the attainment of enlightenment, nirvana. The ego, or the illusion of a separate, permanent self, binds individuals to the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, through attachment, desire, and ignorance. Liberation from the ego involves a profound transformation in understanding and perception, culminating in a state of ultimate freedom and peace. This chapter explores the path to achieving this liberation, drawing on various teachings, practices, and insights. The journey toward liberation from the ego begins with the cultivation of right understanding, the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path. Right understanding involves seeing things as they truly are, free from the distortions of ego and ignorance. This includes a deep comprehension of the Four Noble Truths, which outline the nature of suffering and its cessation. Practitioners must understand that the belief in a permanent self is a fundamental delusion that gives rise to craving and attachment, leading to suffering. By recognizing the impermanent and interdependent nature of all phenomena, they can begin to dismantle the ego's illusory grip. One of the key insights for achieving liberation from the ego is the realization of anatta, or no self. This teaching asserts that what we perceive as the self is merely a collection of transient physical and mental phenomena, without any inherent essence. To internalize this understanding, practitioners engage in various forms of meditation and contemplation. Insight meditation, vipassana, for example, involves observing the arising and passing away of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, revealing their impermanent and insubstantial nature. This direct experience helps to weaken the ego's hold and cultivate a more fluid and interconnected sense of self. Another crucial practice for achieving liberation from the ego is the cultivation of mindfulness, sati. Mindfulness involves maintaining a continuous awareness of the present moment, observing experiences without attachment or aversion. By practicing mindfulness, individuals can become more aware of the ego's habitual patterns and reactions. They can see how the ego creates suffering by clinging to desires and resisting change. Through sustained mindfulness practice, they can develop a sense of equanimity and detachment, reducing the ego's influence and fostering a more liberated state of mind. The practice of ethical conduct, sila, is also essential for achieving liberation from the ego. Ethical conduct involves living in accordance with moral principles that promote harmony and reduce harm. The Buddha outlined 5 precepts for lay practitioners, which include refraining from harming living beings, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. By adhering to these precepts, individuals create a foundation of moral integrity and purify their minds. Ethical conduct helps to weaken the ego's selfish tendencies and fosters a sense of responsibility and interconnectedness, supporting the path to liberation. Compassion, karuna, and loving kindness, metta, are vital qualities for achieving liberation from the ego. These practices involve generating feelings of goodwill and empathy toward oneself and others, breaking down the barriers of self-centeredness. Compassion meditation, for instance, helps practitioners develop a deep sense of empathy for the suffering of all beings, reducing the ego's tendency to prioritize the self over others. Loving kindness meditation involves extending unconditional love and kindness to all beings, including those who are difficult or hostile. These practices weaken the ego's grip and cultivate a more expansive and inclusive sense of self. The development of wisdom, panna, is another critical aspect of achieving liberation from the ego. Wisdom involves seeing things as they truly are, beyond the illusions created by the ego. It requires a deep understanding of the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and no self, anatta. By cultivating wisdom, practitioners can penetrate the veil of ignorance that sustains the ego and see the true nature of reality. This insight is crucial for breaking free from the cycle of samsara and attaining enlightenment. Meditative absorption, jhana, is a powerful practice for achieving liberation from the ego. Jhana involves deep states of concentration and tranquility, where the mind becomes fully absorbed in the present moment. These states of meditative absorption provide a temporary respite from the ego's incessant chatter and cravings, allowing practitioners to experience profound peace and clarity. By repeatedly entering and deepening these states, individuals can weaken the ego's influence and develop a more stable and liberated mind. Engaging with the teachings of the Buddha, Dharma, and the guidance of a teacher, Kalyanamitta, is also important for achieving liberation from the ego. The Dharma provides valuable insights and instructions for the path to liberation, while a skilled teacher can offer personalized guidance and support. A teacher can help practitioners navigate the challenges of the path, provide encouragement, and model the qualities of compassion and wisdom. Developing a relationship with a teacher creates a sense of accountability and inspiration, fostering a deeper commitment to the practice. Participating in retreats and intensive practice periods can significantly accelerate the process of achieving liberation from the ego. Retreats offer a structured environment for deep meditation and contemplation, away from the distractions and demands of daily life. Intensive practice allows practitioners to deepen their meditation, gain profound insights, and experience transformative shifts in understanding. Retreats also provide the support of a community of practitioners, fostering a sense of shared purpose and interconnectedness. Everyday mindfulness and awareness are crucial for sustaining the progress toward liberation from the ego. By bringing mindfulness into daily activities, such as eating, walking, working, and interacting with others, practitioners can maintain a continuous awareness of the present moment. This ongoing mindfulness helps to weaken the ego's habitual patterns and fosters a more connected and compassionate way of living. It also supports the integration of meditative insights into everyday life, facilitating a more stable and enduring liberation from the ego. The practice of humility is essential for achieving liberation from the ego. Humility involves recognizing the limitations of the self and the vastness of the interconnected web of life. It requires letting go of the ego's need for control, recognition, and superiority. By cultivating humility, practitioners can open themselves to the wisdom and guidance of others, develop a sense of gratitude, and foster a more inclusive and interconnected sense of self. Letting go of attachment is a fundamental practice for achieving liberation from the ego. Attachment to desires, identities, and outcomes sustains the ego and perpetuates suffering. By practicing non-attachment, practitioners learn to release their grip on these attachments and embrace the impermanent nature of all things. This practice involves recognizing the transient and insubstantial nature of experiences and cultivating a sense of equanimity and acceptance. Non-attachment weakens the ego's hold and opens the door to a more liberated and peaceful way of being. The realization of emptiness, sunyata, is a profound insight that supports the achievement of liberation from the ego. Emptiness refers to the absence of inherent existence in all phenomena, including the self. It is not a state of nothingness, but rather a recognition that all things are interdependent and devoid of a fixed essence. By realizing emptiness, practitioners can see through the illusion of the self and the ego, experiencing a profound sense of freedom and interconnectedness. This realization is a key aspect of attaining enlightenment and liberation from the cycle of samsara. In conclusion, achieving liberation from the ego is a multifaceted process that involves cultivating right understanding, mindfulness, ethical conduct, compassion, wisdom, meditative absorption, engagement with the Dharma and a teacher, participation in retreats, everyday mindfulness, humility, non-attachment, and the realization of emptiness. These practices work together to weaken the ego's grip, reduce suffering, and cultivate a more interconnected and compassionate way of being. By dedicating themselves to these practices, individuals can gradually dismantle the illusion of the self and move toward greater freedom, peace, and enlightenment. The journey requires dedication, effort, and support, but the profound transformation it offers is well worth the endeavor, leading to a state of ultimate liberation and peace.